I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and the host of Green Rush Live, our regularly scheduled business of cannabis talk show here on Friday afternoons. And joining us is my pal from Washington State. His name is Josh Kincaid. He also hosts the Talking Hedge podcast out there in Washington State. He's also a valued member of our Weed Talk news team that will be following this really live show at 6 o'clock. We will be running our weekly news show anchored by Elena Pinto. And if you guys haven't seen our weekly news show, as someone who's grown up in newsrooms for 30 years, I'm amazed at how really cool what the job that we're doing now and the contributions we're getting from all of our correspondents all over the country and internationally as well. It's worth watching, and it gives you a real good feel for the temperature of the end of prohibition from coast to coast in the United States of America. But we want to welcome in our guest this particular period of time on our show. One is an old friend of mine, someone who's a regular on this show, Jeff Finkel, the CEO of Arcview. Hello, Jeffrey. You got to unmute yourself. I know you're in a car.
Jimmy. Yeah, I'm in a cab, so I was trying to spare everybody the background noise.
Oh, no.
But good to see you, and thank you for having me again.
No, and also we've been doing, I think, yeoman's work on previewing your big event in New York City this week with both people that have had successful runs, pitches with Arcview, and even had a successful exit. And of course, some of the speakers that'll be in New York City this week coming up for that conference as well. So it's been, I think, a pretty good preview show. David Hess is also with us, and I believe you know David. Am I right?
I do. David knows this. He's one of my favorite people in this industry, and glad to be sharing the mic with him today.
Yeah, and David, you're quite the story as a career entrepreneur, but also one of the things that always flips me out when I read people's bios is you're a two-time cancer survivor. Am I right?
Absolutely, Jimmy. Yeah, and cannabis had played a tremendous role in my recovery and still does today.
And I can't tell you, I've been doing over 300 interviews in the last few years here, how many times all of us in this business have heard these kinds of stories that cannabis has saved my life, cannabis has changed my life, and those that still get into the business because of that experience. So is that the motivating factor for you?
It's what drives me, but as we'll probably discover through the interview, I'm originally from Southern California, where we legalized back in 1996. So for myself and my family, we actually started getting into the business of cannabis fairly early. But what drives my passion at a much deeper level is certainly the impact that cannabis had on me as a patient, and my personal, anecdotes that I've been speaking with other patients that have survived over the years with the help of cannabis as well, getting them through chemo and then beyond.
Yeah, fantastic, and a lot of respect. You're running Trust Capital now, accurate?
Accurate, yes.
And how is the investment community right now for the cannabis space? Because we've had differing, not opinions, but observations about what's going on in the world of capital investment in cannabis.
Well, you picked a good week to have me on because it's a positive week, right? We've got all this optimism post our president's remarks about cannabis prisoners, and certainly it's only a first step, right? And hopefully we're going to see a lot more with regards to at the state level, where we actually have most of the prisoners, right, cannabis prisoners today, but also in rescheduling or possibly descheduling of cannabis at a federal level, which is very exciting because that also has ramifications with banks and all kinds of other things. So that's very exciting. And as far as investment goes, well, first of all, that raised the market about 30-40% on Biden's news. So we're all very excited about that. But obviously for the long run, we're undeterred by these ups and downs. It happens with all startups, as I'm sure Jeff can tell you. But our industry is sort of a startup, even though we've been here for a long time. These are just the bumps and bruises and growing pains of an industry. But we're very optimistic and very bullish long term for sure.
Fantastic, fantastic. And alongside is a buddy of yours, Eugenio Garcia. Did I do it right?
That's right, Jimmy.
Thank goodness. The co-founder and publisher of Cannabis Now Media. By the way, I subscribe to your newsletters. I follow, I like, share and all that neat stuff. And I really appreciate you taking the time. I had no idea we'd have a media person on with us today, but you are always welcome because, as you know, media takes a lot of abuse these days. Don't media companies?
It depends which media company.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Tell us about how you got into this and how is it going with Cannabis Now Media?
Thank you, Jimmy. I got into cannabis back in 1995 when I was in 8th grade and enjoyed cannabis all through high school in moderation and through college, and became a political science graduate after in university. And Montana, which is where I grew up. I was born in Los Angeles, but grew up in Montana. Montana legalized for medical purposes in 2004. So I think we were the 7th or 8th state for medical. And my brother-in-law's little brother, who was one of my best friends growing up, he started to be a provider here in Montana, is what they called them. And one day we came up with the idea to start a medical journal for cannabis enthusiasts. And that snowballed into a national magazine that's consumer focused and for the enlightened cannabis consumer. And it's been a wild ride the last 12 years.
Enlightenment is another word of educating the public, those that are not familiar with the product, if you will, as much as many people are in this industry. I've always found that this is exactly one of the reasons why I started this company, was to give a voice to the industry so that they could come onto a media environment and not be attacked by, because it's one of the things I saw when I watched one of the first interviews, probably 5-6 years ago on CNBC, and a reporter showed up and started grilling this CEO, unnamed company, about, you know, the gateway theory and what about the kids and all the myths that have been out there for years and years that have pretty much been debunked by a lot of research and study. And even in more mature states like Josh's Washington or in Colorado, we've actually seen teen use go down as soon as it becomes legal and not something that the kids have to sneak, if you will. They're learning by listening and watching their parents learn and use this product in a positive, responsible manner. So to me, it was one of those things I looked at and I said, I know I could do a better interview than that person, and said, I'm just going to start doing these podcasts. I was encouraged, and you know, here we are, you know, something like in 2 years, we've got about 10,600 subscribers on YouTube, and we've had well over 670,000 views of our videos. So I think we've done pretty well in an organic place right now. Obviously, we're looking to grow this and connect both coasts, and being a news guy, this is something that I am pretty passionate about. So it's really a pleasure to talk to a fellow media baron, if you will. Have you ever been called a media baron before?
I've never been called a baron. I've been called a mogul incorrectly, but I will say, Jimmy, what's interesting about this group is not only is Cannabis Now a portfolio company of Tress Capital, and David and I have been in the trenches for a number of years now in the cannabis space, but actually the Arcview group was the first platform that, as an entrepreneur, I pitched to for capital. I believe it was 2000. It must have been like 2015 or something like that, 16 maybe. And the very first time as an entrepreneur that I ever pitched asking for capital was through an Arcview group Zoom, or it was a Skype back then. And the first time I ever pitched in person was at an Arcview Las Vegas event at a pitch competition. So Arcview was my first introduction into raising capital as an entrepreneur. And fast forward now to 2022, not only are we a media company, but we're also a agency and consulting company. So given the amount of time we've been in the game, now our clients are coming to us not only for marketing, but also for solutions. And in the last year, a lot of the need has been, hey, help me raise capital, help me be connected with people who are investing in cannabis. So I love the opportunity to engage in this conversation from that perspective.
Do you have any best practices on like how you got capital for anybody else listening and wanting to do the same thing?
How best practices?
Any advice?
How much time do we have, Josh?
A few minutes.
We got quite a few. Go ahead.
I mean, look, high level from an entrepreneur's desk, I would say that there is a certain amount of luck and just what I call magic that happens that you cannot discount. Like I went to where I met Tress Capital. I had spent 48 hours at a New York City event, Cannabis World Congress and Expo, I believe it was. And I had spent I had my checklist and every single booth and all my meetings. And for 48 hours, I was running around crazy trying to meet the right people and do all this aggressive stuff. And none of it worked out. And I saw David and his partner Asher standing at the bottom of the escalator. I was walking out. I was about to fly out. Might have had my last magazine in my hand. And I saw his T-shirt, Tress Capital. I said, "You get my last magazine. Let's connect. I got to catch my flight." And they were my first investors. So that's a little bit of luck. But to be more straightforward with your question, preparing for raising capital is the most important thing. Having your financial plan, having your books in order, being very, very clear on your mission, what your product is, and all that's very challenging, especially early days. You have no money, you have no vision. All you know is you got a dream. And so I think that that might be like step 2 and 3. Step 1 might actually be know who you want to be in business with, because who you take money from, it's like a marriage. And you're going to be with these guys and ladies maybe for 5, 10, 20 years. And they're vetting you is normally how entrepreneurs see it. Like they're doing diligence on you, but it really should be a relationship, and only take money from the right people who have the right values, the right mission, who can support you more than just writing a check. I think that'd be my number 1 advice to any entrepreneurs out there.
I'm going to take that to heart, because that's exactly how I feel about who I'd like to work with, because I know I'm very self-aware of my strengths and my weaknesses, and Jeff Finkel knows them very well. In fact, Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of these other success stories, because now this is the second person that we've had on, and this was not planned, who spoke about the same thing. They pitched at an Arcview event that helped them get their funding, and here they are, either have exited or in the middle of an exit, or they're flourishing. Have you ever thought, Jeff, about actually putting together a show or even testimonials of all these people that are out there that Arcview has helped?
You know, boy, there are a lot out there. Here's the statistic that we use. Over a 10-year period, so Arcview was founded in 2010, I think we're trying to actually come up with the actual number. We've done between 40 and 50 investor conferences. And over that period of time, some 350 million has found its way to over 250 companies initiated Arcview events. Now today, in a world where there are lots of debt capital around for the large public MSOs, that may not sound like a very big number. I mean, some large debt deals that the public MSOs are raising are over, $75, $100 million. But during that period of time, I would say that was the majority of the equity financing that landed into the hands of operators in the industry. So, I'm not. I wasn't an Arcviewer in those early years. I really engaged late 2018, started the venture practice with them in the beginning of 20, and became CEO last year. So I don't have that lineage and history to go through each success story. But the impact that Arcview's had as being really a company that facilitated economic growth and capital reaching entrepreneurs in the industry is fairly significant.
Yeah. What's the most important thing, Jeff? I remember asking you this question a few years ago, and you said the team, the people that you bring to the table to work with you. Is that still accurate?
I sometimes are on the other side of this argument. Team is important. I think in cannabis, team is very important. But if I look across my history of investing in tech, timing is a little bit more important, right? So what's the analogy? Remember Friendster? Remember MySpace?
Mhm.
Right? Those were early platforms for social media. But why was it that Facebook took off? Right? Why was it that Facebook wasn't really like pushing the boulder up a hill? It started as Mark Zuckerberg at Harvard wanted to find a place to, a way in which to catalog good-looking women, right? And now every 40, 50-year-old lives their life publicly on Facebook. So
Yeah.
timing has a lot to do with it, and I would argue more to do with it than team. Now that doesn't underscore the importance of team. And timing is a little bit less amorphous as we think about cannabis, because states put out RFPs and then you respond to the RFPs and you raise money. And that's sort of, the timing is sort of organized for you. But in tech, or I would say even in the ancillary side of cannabis, timing might be more important than team, but team is extremely important.
Well, we've already heard a great example about timing. David, as you look at opportunities that are out there, what is the one thing you look for, or is there a multiple of things that you look for?
Certainly a multiple, and timing is what what Jeff said, and certainly there's luck, as Eugenio had mentioned. For us, our common denominator is impact. We want to be, and it's a wide range when I say impact, but it's still, as I mentioned, early days of cannabis, and if we're going to be allocating all this capital, especially on the private side, we wanted to ensure that we're supporting what we feel are the legs of the industry, right? And Eugenio was modest, but in driving this new normalization of cannabis, it is critical that one be able to walk through JFK and walk into Hudson News, and right there next to People magazine or any other magazine is Cannabis Now, right? And the fact that you can do that, I can't understate that enough. What an impact that has on our industry, what an impact that has, globally for cannabis. It's not hush hush anymore. Like you see still some of the other magazines that they have these covers over it. That's not what cannabis is, and it's not next to guns and ammo. It's right there in the open. And so that says a lot. And so impact is certainly whether it's making sure that if you're cultivating cannabis, you're doing so using data and just really maximizing your efficiency, or lab testing or media, right? It's the legs of the industry, and being impactful up and down is where we, that's that first box that has to be checked for us.
Yeah.
Where are you seeing the deal flow right now, Dave? Is it based on either like location or sector, or like where's it at?
Definitely location is big, and we're seeing a lot on the East Coast right now. I think that's where a lot of, it's time to shine right now. Certainly in New York and New Jersey, we're seeing a ton of deal flow. We're seeing a lot of international deal flow as well. In fact, there's also a cannabis conference coming up in Mexico right now, and Latin America is becoming big. I just came back from Israel. They've been doing research on the pharma side, and it's certainly a lot coming out of Israel. And when you have these EU GMP facilities, whether it be in Israel, Malta, or some other places, that becomes a launching pad into Europe for a lot of these brands here in the States. And so what we're seeing is a lot of consolidation. We're seeing a lot of groups working together on really maximizing efficiency and maximizing their dollars, their capital, because obviously there's a certain amount that goes around. Not everybody is going to get funded regardless of the jockey, and that goes back to timing and certainly luck. But there's money that is definitely being funded right now into deal flow. Absolutely.
Is it the ancillary related companies that investors are looking at even more seriously than the plant touching ones? Or
it used to be more that way, right? Now that we're, especially here, President Biden even just talking freely about cannabis and anytime I get my news feed, I mean, I'm in the industry, so a lot of my news feed happens to be cannabis, but you see, your New York Times, Forbes, just writing about cannabis weekly at this point. And it's, become normal. So now it used to be you were either plant touching or you weren't, right? And that was like the first question we would receive as investors. Would you touch the plant? And nowadays it's, I don't hear that as much, especially from investors. Oh no, we don't want to touch the plant. Now, especially in places like New York, that's the first thing that they run to. And not to say that there aren't ancillary opportunities. There certainly are. We're looking at a few now, and we're looking at them very seriously. You've had quite a few years, where some of those businesses, they exist, right? And it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be competitors, but a lot of those ancillary companies have had a decade, right, to get off the ground. So you really are seeing a lot of plant touching opportunities. So if you're not interested in touching the plant just yet, you're gonna not see. You'll be limited in the deal flow you're looking at, certainly, but there's plenty to look at from both sides. But certainly, it's weighted on licensed opportunities for sure.
There's a lot of licenses being sold out there right now. A lot of people get in, they get their license, and then they realize they don't have the capital to move forward, and they have to find capital. And sometimes they're being taken advantage of in many ways. Are we still seeing that happening in some of the states like Oklahoma, even in Massachusetts? I've heard some stories.
Oh yeah, and I was speaking with someone today also. You're also competing with the illicit market, right? And so you've got this very interesting dynamic. You've got, let's take a place like Nevada, for example, where, or California, where you've got tremendous amount of dispensaries and licensed cultivation, but you also have, numbers like 70-80% of cannabis still being purchased on the illicit market. So what some of the bigger multi-state operators or bigger operators in general that are able to do it is they're bringing their prices down to rock bottom, where we're talking, it used to be $300 to $400 for an ounce of cannabis at a dispensary. Nevada, there's billboards everywhere advertising $30 ounces, right? And so if you're able to bring that down to $30, you're knocking out majority of your competition when it's 500, at the very least, to $1,200 to produce a pound of cannabis, and 16 ounces in a pound. You do the math. You're losing money at $30 an ounce, right? But these bigger companies, they recognize that's their way to drive out the illicit market and their smaller competitors. So we're seeing a lot of that, and you're absolutely right. If you're going to compete, I think as a brand, you have to come with a built-in community, and that's also why media is critical for a brand to build itself. It's not good enough to come out with amazing product, right? And what that means in the cannabis world potentially is a new exotic strain, or a strain that works particular to some effect, or has great shelf appeal. That's not going to cut it anymore. And just because you've got a cool looking brand, if you're in New York, that certainly doesn't work, because they've got limits on what your brand can even look like. And it's going to certainly in the beginning look more like the Canadian packaging and be very sterile. So it's the community that you have to be bringing with you as a brand, that's really going to be purchasing from your brand regardless of the strain you put forward, because they trust you. And without groups like Cannabis Now and yourselves putting that forward, you don't have that as a brand, because you can't use traditional media, and not everybody gets to be on Jimmy Kimmel at night advertising their edibles because they're Mike Tyson, right? So you really need to build a brand with your community in the space through loyalty and through other things that really touch the consumer, and that can only be done with groups like yourselves and other media channels in the space, so that those opportunities to get behind those ancillary businesses are there and are still critical. Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to get Eugenio. Did I say that right? It's really, yes, Eugenio? Yeah, I want to get your feeling about what David just talked about with the advertising thing, because I did happen to see our Vermont news this week. Vermont, as you know, just opened up their adult use market, and the marketing and advertising restrictions in that market are extremely difficult to deal with. And as someone who's been in this space now for, gosh, you said 2015, 70 years, how are you doing as far as that goes? And are people still seeking you out to share the marketing dollars that they have? Eugenio?
Unmute.
Unmute.
Thank
Oh, he's
you.
on mute.
Jimmy, just a little love for the PCM community. We have almost 4 million social media followers through our combined platforms. And I did just post this podcast on our Facebook page. So hopefully you get a few more viewers from.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We don't put a lot of money or even thought in pushing things out onto Facebook. We do have an Instagram page. We do have a Twitter page, but I'm not a big fan of social media. I'm old school. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm middle school, so I threw it up there for you, and hopefully some more people from Cannabis Now community is watching.
Appreciate it. I really appreciate that.
You know, I think there's two main categories right now that I believe are going to be the future of cannabis. One is the consumer brand, you know, for lack of a better word, recreational or therapeutic market. And then the pharmaceutical market is the other half of it, which is so virgin and so new. I almost can't even speak to it beyond just a gut feeling that I think cannabinoids will have major medical impact 20, 30, 10 years to come. And that is going to be a whole different game. You know, God willing, instead of seeing 80% of CNN's advertising and commercials be opioid-based pharmaceuticals, it will be 30 to 40% cannabinoid-based pharmaceuticals, because that's maybe the future of pharmaceuticals. But I won't speak to that in this moment, just because beyond a gut feeling, I don't have the evidence yet. Yeah. But as far as brands go, for a long time I said, look, we can't look at this like the alcohol industry, because alcohol is so damaging, and kind of like cigarettes and alcohol, you know, it can kill you if you overindulge in it or indulge at all in it, like cigarettes. But with cannabis, it very much is a branding game. And people who are spending money, they're spending money specifically if they understand what their brand is and what they're trying to communicate to the market. And what I've seen an explosion in coming out of COVID has been experiential marketing to mainstream consumers. And what that means is a lot of in-person events, like micro events or festivals or events for the end consumer, or embedding cannabis into mainstream events, whether it's Bottle Rock concert in Napa or other. I believe the California State Fair had a huge cannabis activation. Coachella. That's where I've seen a lot of money being spent in the last 12 months, as opposed to traditional endemic cannabis spending.
Right. Hey, I just was at a 3-day event in Massachusetts that featured the Whalers. And I'm not talking about the Hartford Whalers. I'm talking about, it used to be Bob Marley but these are the Whalers, and they played pretty much my entire playlist in their concert. I do see a very good friend and someone we have a lot of respect for, and has a show on our live stream. Dr. Mary Clifton has joined us in the Zoom room, and I want to get to Dr. Mary, but I'm going to tease this. We're going to take a break here. And when we come back, I want to get everybody's feeling about the next wave of plant medicine. And are we getting away from focusing on cannabis and morphing over to the psilocybin world? And we'll talk about that coming back with more of Green Rush Live after this. Don't go away.
With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.
Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.